Hello, sorry, it's been a while. In my defense, I can say I've been to Italy to spend a few days with my family. I also have to say I spent the last 2 months, I'd say, penning down my last book. And whilst doing it, I found it extremely hard to read something someone else had written. I kept being over-judgmental over everything, which isn't really something I can deem myself capable of doing. I would approach anything like I was actually proofreading and I was ready to go through it all with a red pen, which is incredibly cocky and arrogant of me. So we'll just move forward. And next, the second I got back was The Great Escape, which I attended because I was working there. And to see what it is that I do, by the way, you can click here or maybe in the doobly-doo. I don't know if I'm capable of linking something on the screen. There's all sorts of musical wonders and general awesomeness. And by the by, you should really check out a band that's called Alt J. You probably have already heard of them, I hope so. But I have to mention them because they changed my life for the better, needless to say. Or maybe it is crucial to say it, like to really underline it and point that out. Moving on, we're talking books once more, and this time I'm starting with Kate Morton. It's her first novel, it's called The Forgotten Garden. It came out in 2009. I feel I have to say this. The Secret Garden was my favorite book when I was a child. The Secret Garden is from Frances Hodgson Burnett, came out in 1911. My grandmother used to read it to me, and she did so many times I couldn't read it, but I could follow the words with my fingers, even if I couldn't recognize the letters yet. All of this to say, I'm really attached. I'm fond of these stories of ancient walls, dusty branches of ivy. I couldn't wait to explore a new, private and secluded garden. And I have to say, I wasn't disappointed, although obviously it's a very different story. First of all, it's a family-type novel. Its power lies in the fact that it's a story of family, of love, but mainly of discoveries, of awareness, and of questions, of secrets. All these questions eventually receive an answer, which is exciting when it comes to stories. I loved the fact that it goes back and forth in time. That's something that I always enjoy in a novel. There's entangled relationships, self-discovery and self-awareness. There are Gothic conventions, like abandoned children and gloomy estates. The major theme is inheritance and legacy, the heirloom that all the family that has come before you leaves you with. Furthermore, it springs from personal experience. Because the author's grandmother, apparently, just like Nell, who's the main character of the novel, discovered she wasn't her parents' daughter when she was 21 and kept the secret until she was an older lady and confided it to her 3 daughters. This real secret is the main point of the secret in the story. It is fascinating to see it unraveled in such a crafty way. Second, this is a suggestion. It's Life of P came out in 2001, and if I'm not mistaken, on the 21st of December this year, so another reason to keep your fingers crossed against the end of the world, the Ang Lee's movie of it will come out. The main character is a 15-year-old boy. We'll call him P because his name comes from a swimming pool and is quite longer. P is shipwrecked and travels the Pacific in a lifeboat, surviving 227 days. If at first he's surrounded by, let's just say, a handful of characters, eventually he ends up alone with a tiger. I'd like to point out that the tiger's name is Richard Parker. One of the most fascinating elements of this book to me has been the description of the relationship between the kid and the tiger. Because what should you do where you shipwrecked on a lifeboat with a tiger? Well, the main concern would be not to make the tiger realize you're a potential dinner. So you have to keep him satisfied and provide water and also establish yourself as an alpha male. But also the book is divided in 3 sections. And, well, the main point is P retelling these events in different ways. When he does, these characters take on different shapes. Basically, they switch from humans to animals, from animals to humans. And this is surprising and inventive. The parallelisms between humans and animals are revealing. It is a story of paths lost and found, of faith, and the ability to coexist. I've read somewhere that someone was disappointed at this book because he or she was expecting to find God through it. Now, I don't know, I really cannot say if God is actually interwoven in these pages. But what I've come to realize is that probably the main element of a spiritual life is love. And this book tells a story of being able to love anything you're not. So in this, yes, I found it illuminating and extremely spiritual. Alright, next is probably my favorite of this selection. It's called Rivers of London. It came out in 2011. It is the story of one Peter Grant, who's overwhelmed by a twist of fate and finds himself reassigned from the Met to a small branch of it, the one which deals with the supernatural and mythological, with magic. The historical and mythological background, especially of London, is beautiful. And much like Neil Gaiman, you happen to stumble upon gods, personified rivers, assorted monsters, all of it with a pleasurable, witty humour. Just as with Neil Gaiman, at times this is so effective, you find yourself giving faces to concepts or places or, again, mythological creatures which otherwise were rather vague. It is absolutely delightful, and it's a saga. Apparently, I'm the last human being to read this. There's 2 more, Moon over Soho and Whispers Underground. They're in my reading list, and I can't wait to get to them. Sometimes when I come across these incredibly famous books, I despair because I think there's so much that I still have to read. One side of it is sort of reassuring, and on the other hand is sort of, again, despairing. But still, this is The Talented Mr. Ripley, came out in 1955. It is the story of Tom Ripley, who's a young man living in New York. In order to get by, he resolves to pretty much anything, including, obviously, small scams and cons. At some point, when things take a turn for the worse, he tumbles along. And in those escalations is, to me, where you actually find good crime novels. What is amazing to me is that Tom's descent is both real and imagined. So not only his physical, his real world, the world surrounding him, crumbles and shifts and changes shape, but also his mental image, both of himself and of the world surrounding him. It is very complete. The image it gives is extremely complete and deep and thoroughly investigated. Okay, next, another suggestion. This is Ready Player One, came out in 2011. And a little bit of trivia. Will Wheaton, who you might remember because he was Gordy in Stand By Me, narrates the audiobook, in case you're interested. He's also a minor character in the novel. Okay, main plot. It's a dystopian world, 2044, where the internet has evolved into something massive. It's called Oasis, and it's this huge multiplayer online simulation game. Again, the virtual has taken over the real world. When, for a sequence of reasons, this realm is up for grabs, everyone starts on a hunt for keys and hints and riddles that need solving. And obviously the adventure starts from here and we meet all the different characters. It's probably the most geeky novel I've ever read. There's this part of a nostalgia trip down memory lane towards the 80s because many of the users of the virtual environment, did I mention it's called Oasis? Anyway, the users of Oasis have developed this strong affection for what they consider to be extremely vintage, the 80s. And I suspect the 80s are beginning, maybe they already have been, vintage for us too, today. But I remember them. I remember what they looked like. I remember what they felt like. So it's romantic and slightly melancholic to see it so rosy tinted. I have to admit this book has a very witty start and the plot is interesting. If I have to say a downside of it, the tech involved isn't cutting edge in any way. This is not sci-fi. It is a nice story, it's pure entertainment, but it's not innovative, it's not Vernesque in any way. At least to me, as usual, this is how I feel. While I was browsing for Ready Player One on Amazon, I read it in ebook. Amazon, who's always so attentive and caring, suggested me Player One by Douglas Coupland. Douglas Coupland has already made an appearance on these videos when we talked about microsurfs. I don't remember which video books it was, which makes me think I should mention. Now on the website you find the complete list of titles I've mentioned in all these videos, so it's rather easier to find them. I'll put the link in the doobly-doo as usual. Anyway, Player One by Douglas Coupland. I have almost OD'd on him this past month and a half, I'd say. And this one is probably the strangest. I don't know why I'm starting from this. Well, probably just because of the name correlation. But the point is, it's not much of a book. It's rather a collection of lectures. So I've heard many complain it doesn't feel cohesive. But again, it wasn't born to be a novel, to be the book it turned out to be. It's a series of lectures. And in a way that I've come to know to be typical of Douglas Coupland, his plot is structured in a very geometrical way. The plot in this case follows 4 characters who end up at the bar in an airport. They're 4 different people, they don't know each other, they're very different characters, and they all go there for different reasons. And while they're there, cataclysmic events occur. Each of them tells a story and the events that are happening. And there's also a 5th character, which is called Player One, who gives a different perspective on it all because he's sort of an external observer, much like in a video game. The 5 chapters are divided between the 5 characters. So again, I don't know if he strains his stories to follow this shape or the shape is a frame and he's more comfortable walking that way. It makes me think of Novecento in The Legend of the Pianist on the Ocean, when he says there's a reason why the keys on a piano are limited, because otherwise the music you could play would be endless, and thus paralyzing. The freedom at that point would be too much. Slightly off topic. Player One came out in 2010. I went back and forth in his production, and I found Girlfriend in a Coma came out in 1998, and as usual, the cover is brilliant. Personally, I find it brilliant. Obviously, the reference to the Smiths song made me love this book even before I had read it. And I found 3 or 4 other Smiths references in the book, which made it slightly more enjoyable than it already was. There are some of the topoi of Douglas Coupland. By now I can say I sort of recognize them, I know them by now. There is a close focus on his characters, and at the same time the frame explodes and opens up to a global scale. So, it's a story of a group of friends growing up in Vancouver. On a particular night, one of them falls into a coma and remains that way for 2 decades. So the book is divided in, I'd say, 3 or 4 different phases. At first, you get these friends, and it's 1978, they're in high school, and as usual, his depictions of the past work very, very well with me. I find them extremely effective, and you really see it all like it was a good version of that 70s show, if you know what I mean. Then again, something crucial happens, the coma. Everything changes, and you see all these lives. Some are medically stalled, some are stalled in a more metaphorical way, and some evolve, some spiral out of control and then regain it. You see all these characters grow up very, very differently, but they stay close to each other. In that way, you can see them 20 years later and see what's become of them. And then the story starts once again because things change again. To be honest, the end of this book is slightly too metaphysical for my liking. Obviously, I do enjoy the supernatural, I've always said this, but the realistic feel of it was, to me, its strongest feature, so I would have liked it to keep it till the end. There's a dystopian bit. It's still extremely effective, and it feels like you are actually hallucinating. So I guess mission accomplished in this. The thing that I like the most about the way Douglas Coupland writes is that he always uses a very wide palette of characters. They're normally very different people, especially if you see them evolving through time. They grow into very different people, and although he always picks one as his main character, that doesn't mean the secondary characters are less loved or less cared for or more vague. They are depicted with these strong strokes, and even if maybe some bits and pieces are missing here and there, the information you have is perfectly enough for you to fill in the gaps. All in all, every time I finish one of his books, it feels like parting from old-time friends. It's that sweet and sour feeling. So, since I was so spectacularly ignorant about Douglas Coupland's production, I read his first book, Generation X. It came out in 1991. Again, it's a group of youngsters, and they share memories and tales. And the feel is that it doesn't really matter which is which. It is a framed narrative. Again, I think he likes it better when he has this frame he's working with. In this case, it's something like the Canterbury Tales or the Decameron. The frame is the fact that these three friends live together, and the book is divided in three parts. The first one happens during a picnic, and then it's something like zooming out. In the second part, the group of characters expands, and in the third part, focus is pulled even further, and it encompasses an even larger frame. The novel is extremely ironic and biting. Apparently, it came into being because Douglas Coupland was asked to write something about the generation of the late 70s, the ones who would be 20 in the 90s, noughties. And as usual, well, again, especially in this case, the cohesive allusions to pop culture, I think eventually helped bringing about much transgressive fiction. The irony probably resides in the fact that Generation X became a marketing term. It is actually a marketing force. So supposedly, it is a portrait of a generation who tries to free itself from labels and strict definitions, and we end up with a new name for it. Generation X eventually described those 20-somethings, overeducated, underemployed, submerged in ennui youngsters. But I don't think it's Douglas Coupland's fault. Besides, he has complained a lot, vocally, about it. So much so that in 2009 he wrote Generation A. And this time, to be on the safe side, the title comes from a quote from Vonnegut. I'll put the epigraph down here somewhere, probably. Maybe he was thinking that this time, if a definition would ensue, it wouldn't have been his fault. Basic plot, again, near future, bees are extinct. During one particular autumn, 5 different people get inexplicably stung. They're obviously plucked out of their environment, interrogated, and then let go. And they return to the world. It is, again, another ultra-connected world. being those 15-minute celebrities, the ones that normally come out of reality shows and you're not really sure why they're famous, what for. The structure of it mirrors the one of Generation X. And I think more than in Generation X. Well, I'm not sure. Well, the point is the stories serve the characters. You understand characters through stories. And it's like they are just a tool for them to express themselves and to make others understand, especially the reader, who they really are. As usual, you're not given an undeniable truth. You're left free to understand of these people and the world they inhabit, whatever you think is right. It is empowering, I like it. Next is another suggestion. I read this in ebook too. It's Jane Harris's first novel. It's called The Observations. It came out in 2006. Its main point of force is the humorous treatment it gives of dark themes. It is set in Scotland in 1863, and our main character is called Bessie Buckley. She's a maid. Her mistress encourages her to write down her thoughts and experiences in a journal and builds a curious relationship with her. She also makes her the subject of odd attentions, of odd experiments. It's not disturbing, quite the contrary actually. Bessie is flattered by these attentions until a discovery is made and things change accordingly, leading to revenge and even more unpredictable consequences. It's laugh out loud in places and creepy in others. Sometimes it feels benignly bipolar. Also, Bessie is quite the character. I found it extremely well written, and to be a debut is surprising. If I have to mention a flaw, and as usual I feel like I have, the plot is not surprising and its twists and turns are always easy to see coming your way. So probably even the end of it won't result spectacular. But it's a very well accomplished Victorian novel with that sort of feel. I really, really enjoyed it. Next, another suggestion I enjoyed thoroughly is 3 Bags Full. And the reference to the nursery rhyme will be quite self-explanatory when I add it's a sheep crime novel. A flock of sheep is grazing the field when they find their shepherd dead. The sheep set about to discover who murdered their beloved caretaker. It is rather interesting to see what sheep have to say about us, humans, and the world we both inhabit. It's quirky and fun at points. It reminded me of Tom Holt, especially Happiness and the Pursuit of Sausages. In that case, we were switching from a farm animal to the other. In this case, there's not much switching, but it's still very deep, and as usual, it's interesting to see humans from a different point of view. This other book I finally chose myself. It's The Story of English in 100 Words. Here are chosen 100 words because each tells a story of how the English language developed up to contemporary usage. And the point is, it's not a systemic history of the language. It is capable of bringing you back to a time where bread equaled power, and it explains on a linguistic level how it changed to a pot of gold and coins. It's fun and it's highly readable, really. It's a pleasure. And at times it can be truly illuminating. Also, next time you feel you have to insult someone, and we all know how displeasant that is, you could shut him up with eloquence and say he is a fopdoodle. This next book is going to make you envious. I'll try to keep it short. This is Prisoner Heaven, is the new book by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. I read it in Italian, which is why I already have. It's coming out in English on the 21st of June. I had read somewhere, I'm probably the last Italian-speaking person to read this, and I had read somewhere it was a prequel. Well, that's not entirely true, because with a very clever twist, it does tell of a story that happens before The Shadow of the Wind. But still, you meet all those beloved characters in 1957 with their lives progressing on, actually taking big strides in the future. The point is you get to hear Fermin's story. I found it amazing. It's probably To my taste, again, it's not as astounding as the first was. But then again, the second, The Game of the Angel, The Angel's Game, I don't know its title in English, I'll write it down here, left me somewhat unsatisfied. Well, this one does not, because if narrative is a sort of pendulum, in my view, in this case, the pendulum does reach unexpected depths when it comes to violence and disturbing visions and images. But it's a price you pay willingly because it means it will reach even higher at the other side of the spectrum, and in this case, it does deliver. I've complained many times about this, but sometimes I feel like characters have to suffer too much for the compensation they receive. This is not the case, and I will say nothing more. Okay, second to last. This is The Death of Grass. It came out in 1956. John Christopher is actually the pen name for Samuel Judd. I actually researched the pronunciation. Apparently it's Flemish, and I really hope I got it right. Anyway, the story tells of a new virus which infects all kinds of grasses and crops, rice and cereals included, and obviously causes a massive famine. Two friends and their families embark on a journey to, hopefully, safety, heading for the farm of the brother of one of them, in a world that's falling apart because it's falling into anarchy, of course. I personally adore The Lord of the Flies, and I found many similarities between the two, because in this case, again, unpredictable circumstances ask for the sacrifice of morals in order to stay alive. So humans are very clearly animals at some point in this book. Beliefs, faith, and obviously the rules of civilization are put to a test. It is a dog-eat-dog situation. Also, there's the theme of Cain and Abel, because the brothers at some point come face to face. I love reading this sort of prescient sci-fi. To be honest, you might think the prose has aged, but these themes, I think they never do. This idea that culture and the cities we live are just an embroidered cloak that we use to hide our cruelest nature is fascinating to me, like there's just an invisible thread keeping us from the abyss. Last, a suggestion again. This came out in 2000, is Someone to Run With. I have to be honest, it took me a while to take on this suggestion because I have a passionate dislike for sentences ending with a preposition. I don't know whether this rule is a myth or you're allowed. I'm guessing you're allowed since someone titled his book this way. Anyway, I was rather wrong because this has been for me a very enjoyable read. It's a story of the state of Israel disguised as a teenage adventure story, much like happens with Salman Rushdie. At least that's the feeling it gave me. A boy trying to reunite a dog to its owner meets a girl, and the dodgy underworld she orbits around. It is a story of young people trying to find their way in a corrupt and violent world. But it manages to be real and magical at the same time, sensitive and vivid. Again, it's a story of a coming of age. I'm saying again because I feel like I'm saying this a lot in these sort of videos. But to me, its strongest feature is the fact that it's full of things that I, and I dare say you, can relate easily because we're talking about young human beings. And then huge differences. And in the fact that you can relate to a side of it and you're interested to the other. It made me think that this story is capable of underlying the core of what makes us all equal. And all the differences are really that cloak that I was talking about before for The Death of Grass. So it's really something that we can lift and take a peek underneath it. So, there you go. If you have survived, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me some of your time, which is the most precious thing you have. I hope, as usual, I've given you some suggestions about new titles you could read. Let me know if you already read some of those are mentioned. Or if you think I've missed something crucial, please write to me. All the contacts are in the doobly-doo. And as storm approaches, okay, it's hail time. Can you see that? Okay. I'll take shelter and see you next time.